You ever get that feeling when you meet someone new and no matter how hard you try, you just can't shake the sense that something's off? Like there's this invisible flag waving above their head that screams, "Warning, weirdness incoming." But everyone around you just acts normal? Chilla. That was me. Exactly a month ago, the day my new roommate, Josh, moved in. I found the apartment online. Cute, reasonable rent, easy commute. You know, the kind of place you settle for when life's not handing you anything particularly shiny. And Josh? Well, he seemed fine at first. Quirky, sure, but not the kind of quirky that sets off alarms. More like that odd uncle who shows up to Thanksgiving with a ukulele and a conspiracy theory about fruit flies. I figured, hey, everyone has their quirks. I'd make do. It wasn't until about 2 days in that I started noticing the odd smell. Not the usual, someone forgot to empty the trash kind, but something else. Imagine the scent of damp moss tangled up with stale onions and maybe a faint hint of burnt rubber. Yeah, don't ask me how those things blend, but it was definitely there, hovering just under the surface, like an unwelcome guest at a dinner party no one wanted to talk about. Now, here's the kicker, nobody mentioned it, not Josh, not Mrs. Thompson, the landlady who popped in to introduce herself on moving day. Not even Karen next door, who has a reputation in the building for being the queen of passive-aggressive check-ins. It was like the stink was invisible, a secret hazard only my nose was allowed to suffer. I'd sniffed discreetly around the kitchen, hoping this was some weird new kind of urban aromatherapy, but nope, just plain old mystery funk. Speaking of mysteries, there was the elevator situation. Right after Josh moved in, he refused to use the elevator for a whole week. At first, I thought he just didn't like crowded spaces, or maybe he wanted to get a little cardio in. But no. Every time we left the building, he'd hop down the stairs like our lives depended on it, avoiding that elevator like it might zap him with some kind of cosmic punishment. I broke my brain trying to figure out what was up. Maybe he was claustrophobic? Possible. But even when I asked, he'd just smile and say something vague like, "I prefer the stairs. Good for grounding." Grounding. The way he said it with this serious tone made me almost believe he was rehearsing for some sort of self-help seminar. And if that wasn't enough, about a week after Josh settled in, I caught him standing right outside the window at 3 a.m., just staring up at the sky with this weird mix of longing and panic. He wasn't talking to anyone, not pacing like someone with insomnia. He was just there, frozen, just watching. I nudged him the next morning, jokingly asking if he was looking for UFOs or something, and he blinked, like I'd caught him doing something embarrassing, then changed the subject faster than I could say Area 51. At that point, I started to really wonder not just about Josh's elevator phobia or the apartment's secret smell, but about who this guy really was. And somehow, a part of me thought maybe, just maybe, Josh wasn't exactly from around here. It felt ridiculous admitting, even to myself, but as he unloaded boxes that looked suspiciously like laboratory gear, and his eyes darted nervously anytime someone mentioned origin stories, I couldn't ignore the tiny sparks of doubt zipping in my brain. The roommate from another planet? Yeah, somehow. That theory felt less crazy than figuring out why the whole building was pretending there was no odd funk in the kitchen. And why, every time I asked Josh what he did for work, his answers were vague enough to make you wonder if maybe he wasn't actually doing anything human at all. So yeah, that's where things stood. Me, trapped in a weird-smelling apartment with a guy who refused to take the elevator, stared silently at the stars all night, and acted like the laws of physics didn't quite apply to him. And honestly, I wasn't sure whether to call the cops or Area 51, but one thing was certain, living with Josh promised to be far from ordinary. Moving in with Josh was like stepping into a live-action episode of some sci-fi sitcom, only without the laugh track to clue me in when things got absurd. The day he arrived, lugging those mysterious crates that clanked in a way no normal moving boxes should, I tried to keep an open mind. But as I watched him arrange what looked like wires, glass tubes, and some kind of handheld gadget that beeped quietly, my brain quietly filed away a bunch of new questions. Josh didn't exactly live like a typical roommate either. For starters, he had an astonishing collection of odd little habits that seemed to crowd every corner of our shared space. Like his morning routine? He'd shuffle into the kitchen, not pour coffee or grab some toast, but instead carefully lay out a grid of tiny, irregular stones on the countertop. Then, with painstaking precision, he'd trace intricate patterns among them using a thin metal rod like he was performing some ancient ritual rather than making breakfast. I mean, I'm all for Zen moments before coffee, but come on. It was borderline creepy. I once asked, half joking, "So what's with the morning rock art? Starting a geology gallery?" He just gave me that trademark smile, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes, and muttered something about balancing energies. For days, the kitchen looked less like a place for food and more like a shrine to obscure mineralogy. Then there was his sleeping schedule. Josh insisted on keeping the blinds open at night, not just slightly ajar but completely peeled back as if challenging the stars themselves to peek in. Our bedroom, which should have been a cozy refuge, felt more like a telescope observatory. I kept asking why, and every time he said something about staying aligned but wouldn't elaborate. Had I accidentally co-signed for an apartment with a part-time astronomer slash cryptic spiritualist? I started double-checking if my lease had some fine print about sharing living space with cosmic entities. The fridge was another saga. Food vanishing became an everyday phenomenon, but it wasn't just your classic, someone ate my last slice of pizza kind of deal. More like, things rearranged themselves or disappeared only to reappear hours later in places they didn't belong, like frozen peas chilling in the cereal box or a carton of orange juice somehow wedged behind a stack of face masks. When I brought it up, Josh shrugged with that infuriating grin and said, "Oh, the flux here is unusual sometimes." Flux? In my damn fridge? Small annoyances, yeah. But they piled up fast, like tiny, persistent snowballs rolling into a growing avalanche of confusion. And through it all, the smell lingered. The same indecipherable blend of damp moss, stale onions, and burnt rubber playing hide-and-seek with my nostrils. I even tried dosing the place with air fresheners, hoping it would mask the funk, but Josh always took them down the moment I wasn't looking. I asked him straight out once, "Dude, what's up with the smell? You cooking something weird?" He just gave me this faraway look and said, "It's complicated, don't worry," as if that solved everything. Tension started creeping into our dynamic though, like when you're trying to stretch a rubber band that's already taut. I'd catch him doing things like tap dancing around certain topics, work, family, where he actually spends his days, and passing off vague answers like, "It's something in the field," or "I keep odd hours for research." Research? Yeah, research my foot. And sure, I'm nosy, but after a week of this cryptic brush-off routine, suspicion was knocking louder than ever. One evening, I came home to find him standing in the middle of the living room with a single lamp casting nothing but shadows in every direction. He was staring up at the ceiling like it was communicating with him or maybe harboring tiny alien spies. He turned when I cleared my throat and said, "Is something wrong?" "Nope, just wondering if you're starting a seance," I teased, but the look he gave me was serious, kind of like I'd made a cosmic joke that only half landed. The climax of these little mysteries, the staircase obsession. After that first week when he officially banned the elevator from his life, he made it clear it wasn't a health or fitness thing. One time, I rode down with him curious why on Earth or beyond it was such a no-go zone. He stepped back as soon as the doors opened, eyes scanning like he expected missiles to fly out, and muttered something about electromagnetic interference before bounding down the stairs like a gazelle. It wasn't long before I found myself questioning what kind of roommate Josh actually was. Someone who could be so meticulous about stones and stargazing, who rearranged food like a sneaky puzzle master, who avoided technology as casually as a cat avoiding water. It was overwhelming in small doses, and the apartment was starting to feel less like home and more like a bizarre chapter in my life's memoir. And yes, living next to Mrs. Thompson and Karen only added layers to this strange onion. Mrs. Dare. Thompson came by with her usual half-intrusive, half-apologetic smile whenever I mentioned any issues like the smell or plumbing quirks, and after a while, I noticed she always skirted around the smell topic too. Karen, well, she was Ken-trolling excellence. She'd pop her head over the fence just to say something annoying in a tone that suggested she knew more. One afternoon, she leaned over and whispered, "Did you see the lights last night?" Funny, isn't it, how Josh is always out at those hours? Funny indeed. So, here I was, stuck in a strange dance with a guy who refused to explain why he did half the things he did, living in an apartment with a weird, inescapable smell, and surrounded by neighbors who exchanged looks instead of answers. The weird was settling in deep, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I should be alarmed or just accept that, yeah, I'd rented with an alien roommate. Except, well, something about Josh wasn't just weird. It was something else. Something that kept building like an undercurrent beneath the daily oddities. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was there, like a secret scribbled in invisible ink waiting for me to figure out what it actually said. And at this point, I was already too invested to back out. What could possibly come next in a place that smelled like a damp, forested planet crossed with a burnt electronics landfill? What secrets lay behind Josh's strange smiles and stargazing nights? I wasn't sure, but I was about to find out. One evening, after another round of my food mysteriously disappearing, or more accurately, performing a Houdini act inside the fridge, I decided it was time to confront Josh. Not in some dramatic showdown on the couch way, but just to put it all out there. These strange noises, the vanishing snacks, the weird patterns he drew with his stones, I needed answers. He was in the living room, fiddling with some contraption that looked more like it belonged in a sci-fi flick than a suburban apartment. I plopped down beside him, cleared my throat, and said, "Josh, seriously, what's going on? The kitchen smells like something's dying in there, food keeps disappearing, and I swear I hear weird noises at night. You gotta tell me what's up." He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, eyes serious, almost as if measuring whether I was ready for the truth. Then he let out this quiet sigh and said, "It's not what you think. Not exactly." His fingers danced over the gadget, setting it down carefully on the table. What else is there to think? I'm starting to feel like I'm living with the neighborhood ghost, or a magician who eats my frozen peas for fun. Josh cracked a small smile, but then grew serious again. There are things about me in this place that aren't normal. He paused. I have routines I have to follow. Things to keep me balanced. Maybe it seems bizarre, but it's necessary. I raised an eyebrow. Balanced? Dude, you place rocks in patterns, avoid the elevator like it's a black hole, and perform midnight stare-fests with the sky? You're officially the weirdest roommate I've ever had. He exhaled, nodding slowly. Weird is one way to put it. Different is more accurate. Before I could press him for more, there was a sharp knock at the door. It was Karen, the neighbor who seemed like part-time informant, part-time spy. She peeked her head in with that mischievous grin, her eyes flicking from me to Josh. Hey, she said, voice low. You need to be careful tonight. Saw someone strange hanging around the building earlier. Didn't get a good look, but kinda made me nervous. Thought you might want to know. I glanced at Josh, who just nodded slightly and said, Thanks, Karen. I'll be cautious. That night, the apartment didn't feel like a home anymore. The air was thick with tension, and every creak or soft thump sent my heart into little flutters of paranoia. Sometime around 1 a.m., I heard it again, soft footsteps outside my door. Then a low, almost humming sound. I peeled back the blanket and squinted toward the door, the weird smell suddenly sharper, more intense, like it was somehow connected to whatever was happening. Suddenly, Josh appeared from the hallway. He looked calm, ominously calm, but there was a flicker of something I couldn't place behind his eyes. What's going on? I whispered. He glanced toward the door, then back at me. There's someone here, someone I didn't expect. His voice was lower now, almost trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. I need to talk to you, now. We sat down in the dark living room, and that's when things finally broke loose. Josh's usual calm shattered with the release of a torrent of secrets. He told me about the routines, the reasons behind the smell, the refrigerator mystery, the patterns, even the elevator avoidance. Each linked to something I could only call otherworldly. You're saying you're not from around here? I asked, half laughing, half incredulous. He gave a dry nod. You think that's crazy, but yes, I'm not from this planet. Not just different habits or quirks, actual origins elsewhere. The room seemed to shrink around me, the scent growing heavier and the strange noises of the night intensifying just outside the walls. I swallowed hard, trying to process someone I thought was just a weird, eccentric roommate claiming to be an actual alien. Before I could respond, there was a sudden movement outside the window, quick flickering shadows against the street lamp's flicker. Karen warned us about a strange visitor, I muttered. Josh stood up, eyes sharp and alert. That visitor isn't just a neighbor. It's connected. It's why I can't stay silent anymore. The night stretched before us like an unraveling mystery, and I realized this was no longer about a weird roommate or odd smells. Something much bigger was playing out right here in our unassuming little apartment, and I was tangled deep in the middle of it. Josh's confession hung in the air, dense and heavy like the unusual smell that had stubbornly invaded our apartment from the start. He looked at me with an openness that was almost tender, as if letting me in on something so utterly extraordinary that it rewrote every assumption I'd made about him, and probably about life in general. I know it sounds insane, he said quietly, but being from where I am, well, means there are rules. Patterns that must be maintained. The stones, the fridge, the elevator. They're all part of keeping me anchored here without losing myself. I blinked, trying to wrap my brain around this cosmic roommate reveal. So, you're telling me the reason you avoid the elevator is some kind of electromagnetic thing that messes with your sense of being? And all those rock patterns are some kind of ritual to keep you balanced? That actually makes a weird kind of sense. Josh nodded slowly, his gaze distant. Exactly. The smell? It's a byproduct too, a kind of energy discharge from my adjustments to this dimension. I can't get rid of it completely, it's part of me, in a way. By then, the night had thickened, wrapping around us like an invisible cloak. The air outside seemed charged, like the calm before a storm, and I could feel my pulse quickening not just from surprise, but from a strange mix of curiosity and a bit of fear. Not the fear of the unknown, but the vulnerability of having this secret bared to me. So, I said, struggling to find the right words, what about the stranger Karen saw, the one lurking out there? Josh's eyes darkened, flickering with something urgent and cautious. That was one of theirs. Someone from my world who doesn't want me here. Their presence destabilizes the conditions I've created to stay balanced. I never wanted to drag you into this. I leaned back, absorbing the weight of that. Well, you kind of already did, and honestly, I'm not running yet. I want to understand, how do I even help? He smiled genuinely this time, no cryptic layers, just relief. First, by trusting me, then by staying close. Things might get strange for a while, but I promise you're not alone anymore. In the following days, our dynamic transformed. The odd noises didn't stop, and the smell lingered stubbornly, but they began to feel less like intrusions and more like part of a secret rhythm I was finally starting to tune into. Josh showed me how to help with his patterns, explaining the significance of each carefully aligned stone and how to sense the subtle energy shifts. There were moments when I could almost see the apartment pulse beneath my skin, like a hidden heartbeat sync to his alien presence. The stairs continued to be his sanctuary, and I even caught him performing what he called grounding techniques on the sidewalk outside, which once included tracing symbols on the pavement that I swore glowed faintly under the streetlights. Karen stopped her passive-aggressive check-ins, probably realizing the gravity of what was happening, or maybe just deciding it wasn't her circus anymore. Mrs. Thompson, ever the landlady, just gave me a look one day and said, "You're handling it better than I did when I was your age." I never asked what she meant. Some secrets are probably better left untouched. And me? I grew into my role as a sort of cosmic housemate, less freaked out by the strange and more fascinated by the unknown. I realized that trust, in all its messy, complicated versions, could stretch beyond what I thought possible, even to living with someone who might be a visitor from another planet. When the time finally came to move out, because life keeps moving forward, I wasn't just leaving an apartment. I was stepping away from a chapter that forever altered what I thought reality could hold. Standing outside the building on my last day, I glanced up at the sky and caught Josh, not far off, eyes wide and hopeful as he searched for something beyond the stars that had changed my world. And for once, I didn't think it was crazy. Maybe, just maybe, some roommates really are from another planet, and sometimes the strangest stories make the strongest friendships.